So it's the next day. I've come down to clean up the shop a little bit and put away stuff from our relatively hectic efforts turning the boat yesterday. So from about 2 o'clock in the afternoon to about 4 o'clock, all told, we turned this boat over. And the actual time it took to turn it was much less than that. The actual time involved in doing the work was only, it was probably half an hour tops. But we had to work out a few problems along the way. And we had to work out a few systems because things didn't quite go the way I had planned or hoped. And again, I didn't really know how it was going to go. I've never done anything like this. And in hindsight, it wasn't that exciting, but as we lowered the boat down, gravity started to take over, and we ended up just getting it in control so that we could lower it down onto the starboard chine. Definitely was less controlled than I would have liked, and the chine hit the deck hit the floor with, ultimately it caused no damage to anything. At no time did we feel like we were in a perilous situation that was going to be tough to recover from. What we did instead was spend a lot of time thinking through the next step and figuring out the best way to do it with what I had available and with the manpower we had, which was 2 of us. I could have done it alone. Now that I've done it once, I think I could do it alone if I needed to, but certainly better to have at least one helper. All in all, it went pretty well. The boat is successfully upright, and that was the goal, and that's what really matters. And basically safe, and at that point we left it pretty much the way it is. It's sitting right now on 2 dollies, one at the center line in the stern and this one here at the bow. And that's not really stable enough to do any work on the boat, so I'm going to take care of that. I have 4 of them. My plan was to set it on 4 to allow me to move it around, but also to keep it nice and stable. So that's my next thing. And then I assess and move on from there. But I'm thrilled to have it upright. The boat looks great. It looks surprisingly voluminous, roomy. It's got a great, deep, comfortable cockpit, and then this bird watcher walking slot that leads forward through those bulkhead slots. That's going to be a fantastic feature of this boat. It's really the selling point of the boat. We all kind of thought the transom looked really low, but that is the height it needs to be. It's designed for a short shaft engine, 15-inch engine shaft, and that is 16 inches from the bottom of the boat, roughly. It's a 15.5-inch transom plus the bottom, which is 5/8. So it's just over 16 inches, just how it's supposed to be. It's a flat bottom boat. There's no draft. So when this sits in the water, only 2 or 3 inches of this hull is going to be in the water. And the top sides are very high on this boat. The boat's basically all top sides. Now it would be possible, and I've considered it. I haven't made any decisions yet, but it would be possible to kind of just create a cutout where the engine goes and raise the transom on both sides. I'm not sure I'm going to do that because I want to leave room for a kicker. So the long and the short is that's the right height. That's the height it was designed, and that's the height I built it. So I ended up with the boat on blocks. Got 2 here at the stern. These are 6-inch blocks. And a couple more up here, kind of at the forward end of the flattest part of the boat, right under the bulkhead. And then up here at the bow where it rises up quite a bit, I have a couple more blocks, a little thicker. Sorry for the camera work. I just wasn't happy with how it was sitting on the dollies. This is pretty solid now, solid enough. And this is probably not the final solution, but it's what I have for right now. So this is what I'm going to do and get some of the inside work done, and I'll figure it out from there. But this is where it is for right now. Just kind of naturally supported. It's not, I haven't forced it in any direction. To repair this damage, first thing I'm going to do is remove these 2 screws, get those out of the way so that I can see what I have to do to force this plywood back in position and glue it and otherwise repair it. So the first thing I'm going to do is remove those screws and see what we can do here. So I've got those screws out and some of this loose material removed. There's no point in keeping that in there. Just thought I'd peel this back a little and see what's going on in there. You can see the wood itself is shattered. There is wood against the epoxy, so again, it was not the epoxy joint that failed. It was the wood itself. Now, I subjected this to stresses it was not designed or intended to ever experience. So this isn't a construction problem with the boat or a design problem. This is a me lifting the boat problem. I was pulling on too much on this. I should have had the load spread on either side of the bulkhead, or better yet, through the bulkhead like I finally did. And that actually worked well, and I think that would have been a good method for lifting the boat. So I'm going to chip some of this out of here until I can get this back in place. So I forgot to turn the camera on, but I've gone ahead and removed the 2 screws, and then I just peeled away some of the loose material. And now I'm working on getting this cleaned out to the point that I can push this back where it belongs. It's almost there. Remove any shattered material that's in there. It's basically the wood or the glue and the lamination of the plywood that broke here, and that's totally fair. I think we're basically there. So I've got this pretty much cleaned out. I can pretty much get this back in where it needs to go. Room for lots of epoxy in there. I'll clean that out a little bit more. I'll get some sandpaper in there or something. And I'll get this plywood clamped back into where it belongs. And then when that's cured and stuck back in place, then I'll effect the repair over the outside. I'll grind it out a little bit and put in a piece of 6-inch biax tabbing, 1708, or whatever it needs. It might be a little wider than that, so I might just cut a piece to fit whatever it needs and fill and fair and move on as if it never happened. Got an epoxy mix here, just a small batch. It's got high density filler in it because that's very strong, and silica Cabosil. This isn't the final part of the repair by any means, but it's going to stick this back in where it belongs, and then I can worry about affecting the rest of the repair. A piece of plastic here so the clamp doesn't stick. And this is where we ended up, first part of this repair. I've got that all cleaned out, and I filled it with a thickened epoxy mixture and clamped it tightly across the top of this bulkhead. That pulled it in right in line with the rest of the hull. Formed a fillet on the inside and just smoothed out beyond that and as much as needed. And then underneath where that clamp is, it's putting all the pressure on that piece of the hull on the after side there that has broken away. And I've filled the rest of the void that's in there, the void that I created by pulling out shattered material. So that's all full of the thickened epoxy mixture. That'll hold this hull back in place, and then I can finish up the repair from the outside. So here's where this ended up after gluing this piece back in place the other day. It's all back where it needs to be and well secured. Stand still for a minute. And then around the back side or the inside, got a fillet here. So that's pretty secure. From here I plan to grind out a section of this just deep enough to hold a layer of tabbing, like 3/16, an eighth, somewhere in there. One layer over the top of this, and just big enough to cover this area, whatever it needs to be. I'll incorporate this hole from my eye bolt as well, and that'll finish up this repair. And then eventually there will be some more filleting on the inside. This bulkhead's not filleted yet. I'm wavering back and forth on whether to put some tabbing on this bulkhead. Anyway, that'll be the next step in this repair. So here's where this ended up after grinding it. I ground down a lamination or so of the plywood. See, here's the full thickness, and then up here where I've ground, I've taken it back about that far. And I extended well below and to each side of that crack. I think the mechanism of this break was at the screw locations that provided a weak point for how I was actually stressing this panel, which isn't how it was supposed to be stressed. That's no problem. That was totally my fault for not lifting it right. I thought that was going to work. And here's the patch. It's one piece of 1708 fiberglass over the top. Should be flush or just barely below the surface of the plywood. So after a light sanding, when this is cured, and a fairing compound over the top, no one will be the wiser, except for all of you who watched me do it. I taped over and filled that bolt hole from the inside. And once this glass is done, then, I'll work on the rest incrementally, but I wanted to get this repaired. Get the hull back in order, make sure there were no funny shapes going on or anything like that. So here we are, that's all done. And that's the end of the structural part of this repair. The rest will be cosmetic. Hopefully you can see. I'm trying to hold the lens so that it's in line with the top edge of the boat. But it's got its correct shape going by here. Remember that there's this swoop that starts right at this point, so it makes it look a little funny from here. But this is all right back where it's supposed to be. That was really painless. First thing I'm going to do as I turn my attention to the inside of the boat is I'm going to take out these two temporary frames. There's this one here in the cockpit and this other one up forward. And I'm going to take these out because they're no longer necessary. And they're also going to be in my way as I try to move around this boat. With those temporary frames out, any minor irregularities caused by them are now gone. The hull shape here on the forward end looks totally natural to me between the bulkheads. And it also looks pretty good here at the stern. Anyway, they're no longer needed. This looks pretty good. This part of the hull here is definitely wobbly because there's very little support at the moment. Putting in the gunnels down here will stiffen that up substantially, and so will any other trim that I put up at the deck edge or the coaming. I mean, it's, like 8 feet of unsupported 3/8 plywood, so what would you expect? The next move is to pull out all of these temporary cleats running across the plywood seams on the bottom. There's 4 sets. I'll remove those and get some measurements so I can cut some tabbing to get these glassed up. So I've got the 8-inch tabbing rough cut to length, and I've got it in the boat, and I'm just using a 1-inch ruler to mark it just a little shy of the hull edge. Eventually I'm going to tab this whole bottom seam. So I'm keeping this seam tabbing across the boat just shy of the edges so that it doesn't wrap up at all. And that way I can roll it out nicely and easily. So I'm going to mark it 1 inch in on each end on all 4 pieces. And then I'll cut the 6-inch after this. To finish off the hull seams inside the boat, or the bottom seams, I should say, after minor preparations, vacuum, solvent wash, I installed 2 layers of 1708, an 8-inch piece and a 6-inch piece, just like I did on the hull, and some PO ply to make it nice and smooth. And I did this in all 4 locations. And I kept the tabbing about an inch short of the sides of the hull, and that space will later get covered when I tab the bottom to the bottom of the hull, which I will do once this is cured. So that'll be super strong and flush, so it's not going to be a hassle when moving around the boat when it's all complete. It's the next morning, and I've gone ahead and pulled the peel ply from these 4 reinforcements over the seams in the bottom of the boat. They all look real nice. The gap towards the edge is intentional. Eventually the tabbing that I'm going to install between the bottom and the hull will cover that. And this whole interior will eventually be epoxy coated. This finishes up the major structure for the boat. Other than the tabbing I'm going to add from here is all optional. It's not called for in the design or the plans, but I'm going to do it just because I think it'll be better and stronger and make for a nice interior. Now we're in the cockpit. 2 more seams. You can see the difference in the color of the epoxy. These 2 are nearly colorless, and the 2 up forward have a little more color It's because I've cycled through enough epoxy that I've pretty much come to the end of the epoxy that had sat around longer. The hardener is really what it is. But I'm now into basically all fresh hardener, and these particular seams here are really showing the difference. Look at the hull tabbing there versus the tapping next to it on the bottom. I've explained why my hardener gets this dark. I kind of like the dark, makes it very easy to mix. However it comes out, I don't care. It doesn't make any difference to the epoxy. But it is interesting to note the contrast. But anyway, these seams are all set. Nothing more to be done there. So the little patch on the hull cured overnight, and I've just given it a quick water wash and a very quick sanding. Mostly the edges. I scuffed up the middle part, but mostly the edges so that they're flush with the surrounding. And because I recessed this, that was not a big problem. There's just a little bit of that ground recess right around the edge here, because the patch was just barely smaller than the overall width. This is just a tapered area, so that'll get filled later with fairing compound, but this is all flush. You can see I sanded across, and here's the sanding mark around the edge. So that's how I know that it's smooth and flush at the edge. Might not look like it because of this rough area, but this is actually low. So this will get skimmed over with fairing compound a little later, not today. But that is complete. Very happy with that. Very strong, stronger than that plywood lamination that I basically removed. So we're all back to normal here. All that's left on this is cosmetic work, fairing and cosmetic work.